Loud enough?
Oh yeah,
Probably
you sound great as
a
always.
little bit.
Yeah.
No, you sound good. Awesome. All right, I guess we'll just start chatting then.
Okay.
Absolutely. We'll
Wonderful.
wing this one. I have no questions prepared,
So,
Josh.
well,
Usually I have stuff.
I'll start. I was trying to remember, Dan. I mean, we last saw each other at the triathlon industry
Yeah, that's years ago.
event, right? Was that Arizona? Was that
Yeah.
like right at the beginning of COVID? It's all so fuzzy in my brain.
Yeah,
now.
that had to be 2018, maybe 2018.
Yeah, like
2019.
right. God,
Maybe
feels like
2019.
another lifetime.
Yeah.
So thank goodness we're getting back to a point where we can all get together and meet, because I certainly missed that during those couple of years there. That was brutal.
Yeah. And by the way,
I saw Dan twice at Sea Otter. Once at the Envy House,
Yes.
where Envy was launching some wheels, and that was pre-COVID, Dan.
Yeah.
And then we saw each other just a couple months ago at the regular spring event. We both were in the same shuttle together,
Yeah.
getting a ride to the Expo.
Yeah. Well, that's it. We had this. It's yeah. I mean, I don't know if you guys read the latest op-ed in Brain about how dire the bike industry situation is in terms of inventories and sales and all that stuff. But and all that happened in COVID affected that. It affected it well. It affected the industry well and then poorly because of a variety of things, which we all know and don't need to go into. But we had that hiatus, and here comes Sea Otter, and we're back, and everybody's kind of singing the blues industry wide, except for I want to remind people that in triathlon that it's not like that. In triathlon, we still don't have bikes. We've been waiting for 4 years for bikes. We still don't have our bikes. We don't have our Canyon Speed Maxes. We don't have our Cervelos because everybody thought they were going to sell something else. So yeah, so we all had this, our get-togethers that I absolutely miss pre-COVID, and now we're finally starting to see each other again, which is great. But I do find it interesting the industry response over this past 4 years, and just how that's all worked out.
Yeah, no, it's been crazy times. I think the other thing I know our listeners may not know, and I know certainly I'm on your site, Slowtwitch, pretty much every day, interacting with people.
Well, bless your heart.
One of the kind of common themes I enjoy it. I learn a lot there and try to help. I learn a lot from our customers and athletes, and hopefully they can learn something from me. But one of the things that I've noticed is, a lot of people talking about, how expensive all the equipment's getting or gotten, and there's a lot of banter on that. But one of the kind of ironies of the inventory situation that so many of these companies are in is the industry really doubled down on e-bike and lower cost bikes, and just how much of the trouble is being caused by the glut of lower cost. And at the same time, to your point, it's the really expensive high-end bikes are actually really quite hard to get right now.
Well, I think that
I do want to
for sure. It's
go ahead.
It was really an odd response because COVID wasn't going to last forever. It was going to last X number of months or a year and a half or 2 years or whatever. And we had the supply chain problems, which closed down all the factories and closed down all the shipping. And so there were going to be these, 2-year lead times to get bikes anyway. And so everybody ordered the bikes that they wanted for COVID that weren't going to show until post-COVID. And so the response was kind of predictable. Meanwhile, everything that required a race for validation, an aero helmet, an aero wheel, a triathlon bike, a wetsuit, all that stuff, you couldn't use any of those things. during COVID because there weren't any races. And so all the purchases that required a race were put off until racing resumed. And so now we need all that product, but nobody made any bar end shifters. Nobody made any triathlon bikes. Nobody made any of that stuff. And so here we still are, and the industry has a whole bunch of stuff that they can't sell, and none of the stuff that people want to buy. Anyway, I bring it up because
which is a big problem.
We don't have a bike bust. We have a massive miscalculation in inventories and ordering that we're working through right now.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know why I brought that up.
That's for sure. I will say too. Yeah, no, I mean, I think too your point, and certainly with hindsight, it's easy to say. There was an online industry forum around the Taiwan, the Taipei show during COVID, and one of the biggest brands, one of their top people, had showed a chart that was essentially showing like almost endless growth out to 2030. I want to think it was, or 2028, and I remember seeing that and just thinking like, oh wow, we were really deluding ourselves into some nonsense, right? Like either COVID's going to go on forever and the racing's never going to come back, and that's never going to, that's never going to happen because, you start to do the numbers and you're like, well, eventually every member of the population has bought 3 bikes in 10 years, and we know that's not going to happen. But there were just some assumptions made. But I really do think you had at least half of this industry calculating based on some of that rationale, if we want to call it rationale. And it just proved to be terribly wrong. And here we are. I mean,
You're right. I think Jay Townley and Rick Vosper had it pretty well figured out and calculated, and as all these orders are being, and Rick Vosper's kind of taking over, it seems to me, as the industry sage, and he's right. The only thing every time I talk to Rick, it's like, yes, you're right, but not triathlon. Make sure the high end racing and triathlon, that's still we're still trying to get that product. We still don't have that product. Anyway, but if I could, I know you're supposed to ask the questions, but I'm taking this opportunity to, I don't get to talk to you that often, and there's always all kinds of stuff I want to talk to you about. So if you don't mind, I want to ask you a couple things.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we talked about stuff, it's like because my approach, when we attract partners on Slowtwitch, largely, and I haven't ever told my readers this, I don't think, but my approach, rather than just going out, like sending out, media kits and stuff like that, my approach is always, what sounds interesting to me? What do I want to write about? What do I want to use? Where do I think the industry is going? Where are my purchases going? What am I going to be writing? And then over the next 3, 4, 5 years. And then I go out and I pick certain brands, and it's like, this is where I'm going. This is where I personally am going. This is the bike I'm going to ride. This is the tire. This is the wheel. This is the handlebar. This is where I'm going. I think you're going in a parallel place. You want to go with us, because if you do, let's talk about a partnership. That's how because I'm 66 years old. There's just only so many things I want to write about anymore. And I don't want to write about stuff that I'm not interested in. And so that's kind of what animates me. I just got back from 4 days of riding in the Sierras, and I took my product that I like to write about and that I like to ride, and I went gravel riding, essentially like sort of road/gravel, for 4 days on a Cervelo R5 with some 32 millimeter tires, and I spent a lot of time off road with that. But that product is that particular product, which I found that I needed for that ride, for that trip, in this particular case, there were some Cadex AR wheels and Cadex 32 millimeter tires. It's tubeless, it's hookless, and I ask around, I asked Xavier Disley and Bastian Donze at Zip and Ken Avery at Vittoria, and all my peeps, that at the tire companies and the wheel companies. What's the pro Peloton riding? And what I keep hearing is it's still 25 millimeters in time trial largely, but for road, for classics it's 30. For road it's 28 and 30, and this typical road stages, not just cobble stages, and it's like all tubeless, all tubeless, like. Several teams, all tubeless. The other teams, 80% tubeless. And the few holdouts are a combo of tubular and the Tubolito type tubes. And however, I also find that, pardon me, I'm just babbling, but I also find that it's largely wheel driven in this sense. If your wheel maker only makes a wheel that has a 19 millimeter internal bead width, that limits the size of the tire. Like if you want to ride 30s, you can't, because the inner bead width is really too small for a good performing wheel.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, if your wheel sponsor is making a 25 millimeter internal, you can't ride 25s, period. You have to ride 28s. And so largely the tire width is now determined by the wheel provider. But that's it. I just told you everything I know. So now I want to know what you know. Where do you think it's going? Rule 105.
That's what we know.
Yeah, I mean, from a lot of for road, if we're going to put it at road, I think the sort of crossover point from all the data that we've seen and all the testing that we've done is going to be around 32. And I think it's that at pro speeds, you become so much more drag driven. I mean, especially at the speeds the Peloton's riding today. I mean, it's like every time I watch pro racing, I'm like, Jesus, these guys are flying. And so, that shifts things a little bit more drag heavy. But also you have these like diminishing returns on the rolling resistance side, from 21 to 23 was, maybe a couple of watts, and to 25 is maybe a watt, and to 28 is maybe a little less than a watt, and to 30 is, from 32 to 35 is like almost nothing for most of the manufacturers. And I think the only thing that could change that is there some tire construction like radial or something that could come into play that maybe we could execute, say, at 35 that we can't execute at 30 or 32. Oh. But for the technology of today and the tires being the CRR that they are, which is quite low, that really becomes this sort of inflection point that, if you're riding faster than X, a 34 or 5 is a big aero penalty with almost no rolling gain. So I feel like we're there, and I think the interesting thing, and I feel like I go back a long way, and I grew up dreaming about writing stuff that you were inventing, right? Right. So, but I think we are in this really crazy period where we got rid of the rim brake, and all of a sudden we had the opportunity to really learn about this area that had been solved, air quotes, solved up until now. And then you realize, oh, wait, this wasn't solved for at all. This just was solved within this narrow box that the rim brake had put us in.
The rim brake really put us in jail.
It's in a way it did. Yeah, it really hemmed in. It was the guardrails, and as it turned out, a quite narrow set of guardrails for that technology. And
you see all these you see how these widely spaced fork blades and chain stays on or seat stays on bikes. It's not just the Coup and the Cadex. that new BMC TT bike that we've been getting spy shots of. I talked to the
a lot of that
making these bikes, and they're all going wide. They're all all doing that, and that's disc brakes. Disc brakes is what's allowed that.
Yeah.
Dan, when you say the rim brake put us in jail, do you explain that?
Well, you couldn't do what you wanted with fork plates. I mean, I'm not an aerodynamicist. I just, I stayed in a Holiday Inn Express last night. I do, really, I go to the wind, I stay in the Holiday Inn Express, I go to the wind tunnel, and I watch guys like Josh do it. And I just notice what's happening. And really, going all the way back to 1990 in the wind tunnel, we saw these wide fork blades working because you don't get interference drag. You don't get this parasitic drag that you get when the blades are too close to the wheel and the air doesn't know do I go through there? Do I go around there? And so you get this sort of confused air. And wide fork blades and seat stays allow the air just to sort of pass through, below the chest. The air just has a kind of a more predictable place to go. You can't do that without disc brakes. You can't make the wheels that you want to make when you have to contemplate rim brake. I actually think that without a rim brake surface and without heating at that area, that also is a factor that tends to favor hookless, because I'm not an engineer either, by the way, but it seems to me that if one of the things that you need to do with a hookless system is have an unstretchable tire bead, that if you know that the temperature in that area is going to be X and not above that, then you can design a tire bead for the tire that won't expand or flex when overheated, and it creates a safer environment for hookless. Which, by the way, I'm a hookless fan, but I'm only a hookless fan at 28 millimeters and up. I start to really become a hookless fan at 30. I'm okay at 28. I kind of think there needs to be about a 5 millimeter delta between inner bead width and measured tire size. So 23 millimeter rim, 28 millimeter tire, and you follow that up like that. But none of that stuff is possible. I mean, hookless beads, even tubeless, all that stuff.
Yeah.
None of that stuff is really possible with rim brake wheels to the degree that it is with disc brakes.
Oh, we did it though. Rim brake and tubeless. I did it. But it wasn't a comfortable feeling. That's for sure.
Well, the Wild West.
I would say we tried.
Tubeless.
We tried to do it, and it didn't work very well. But
I mean, I remember.
I think we're really in a golden moment with.
When I was making bikes, and I'm going to say Adam Micklin was at Hutchinson back then, and I believe he was talking about road tubeless back then. This is mid 1990s.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So we've been, trying it since then, and then, Mavic and so forth. But I agree with you, Josh. As a matter of fact, what I tell folks, when people talk to me about product now, and it's, what do we need? What's the industry? I have all the product I need. I think over the next 5 years, the big move isn't going to be a product move. It's going to be a logistics move. It's going to be, where are we making our bikes? Where are we assembling our bikes? Are we finally going to get to JIT in bike making? How are we going to get our bikes delivered to us? Are we going to get white glove, last mile, guy rings your doorbell, hands you your bike, built to your fit coordinates? To me, that's the stuff that's really animating me now, because I feel like, other than saddles, but road saddles suck. these days. But beyond that, I feel really good about where we are in terms of product.
No, that's good. Yeah, I actually wanted to, so for our listeners who maybe don't know you as well, you have a bit of a reputation for being a sage in this industry. I mean, you've been at the forefront of, you invented the triathlon wetsuit, like just saw that as a category, invented it, made the product. I mean, built that entire piece of the industry. You basically invented the triathlon bicycle as it was thought to be for, I mean, a huge period, and a lot of that still plays into now. And then founded Quintana Roo, which you, when did you sell QR?
I started it in 86, 87. I sold it in 95. I ran it until 1999. So I ran it for 4.5 years. And then I moved from manufacturing to Slowtwitch. I started Slowtwitch 3 weeks after I left. So,
and that would have been 99. Because I mean, I think of that as being so prescient, though. I mean, it's 1999, and you're the guy saying, this is all going to, like, you know, the internet was like essentially 96.
Well,
and
see, I
by 99, most people still didn't have it. And you were the guy saying, this is the future.
But see, it was, from my point of view, it was different. I lost 6 years of my life because I was shown the World Wide Web in 1993. And I realized that the world was never going to be the same. And so so I said to my staff at QR, I said, I'm going to be at home. I'm going to be gone for 4 months. You just run the business. And in 93, I mean, it was really, there was nobody there to teach you how to code. Fortunately, what was it? What was that browser back? Mosaic. Mosaic was the only web browser at that time. And Jeff Andreessen, Mark Andreessen, bless his heart, founder of, like, the guy who built Mosaic and co-founder of Netscape, thought to put the source code as an option in the browser. So you could click a button, there's the source code. And that's how I taught myself HTML code. So QR launched the first, little known fact, first bike manufacturer with a web page, Quintana Roo, 1993. 1 month before Specialized. Wow. And so, yeah, we were up with, and I wrote it, the page, because I literally knew no one else who knew how to write HTML code. So from 93 to 99, I was just kicking myself. It's like, we need to exploit this. We need to, we're losing time. World's going to catch us. World's going to pass us by. So I actually felt when I started Slowtwitch in 99 that I was already late. I was too late. But that's what it was.
Wow. Wow.
But there's one more. There is one more thing that I sort of came up with, right? That, not to toot my own horn, but just I consider it sort of important because we started our bike fit school back in 2002, and we came up with this idea of dynamic bike fitting, and in order to prescribe the complete bike solution after you fit someone to a set of fit coordinates, what was logical and what came out of that was stack and reach, which I never thought would end up on all the geometry pages of all the bikes, but it did. But I bring this up only because if you take a look at all these things, like, I didn't invent the wetsuit. I just invented the triathlon wetsuit. I didn't invent the tri-position. I just made a bike that fit up underneath the position we were already riding on our road bikes, so that we would have half the weight on the front and the rear wheel instead of 70% of the weight on the front wheel. And stack and reach were also very obvious. Like, all these ideas that are ascribed to me were obvious. It didn't take any a smart guy to do it. It just took an observant guy to do it. So really, oops, pardon me. I'm much more of an observer and just somebody who acts on observations as opposed to who doesn't act on the observation. Josh, I consider you much more of a designer, inventor than I am.
Oh, well, that's kind of you. It's funny. I mean, I actually consider myself a lot how you just described yourself, right? I feel like my skill is immersing myself in other people's worlds and then pulling from ideas and areas that other people have maybe solved or taken. And I'll add to that my second skill is being the guy that's willing to call the person that's way smarter than me and ask them if they want to join. You know, I mean, I think
that's why
some of my best, inventions that I get credited for a lot of times are me calling someone saying, "Hey, you want to help me with this?" and so I love that we have that with each other, right? I think that's so often the media spins that as like, this guru or that, whatever, but it's none of us are acting in a vacuum, and in a lot of cases we're standing on each other's shoulders.
Well,
which I love.
When people ask me about this idea that they have, whatever it is, what I always say to them is share it. Don't try to protect it. Don't try to keep it a secret. I mean, you can patent or trademark something if you want, but you need to risk sharing this with smart people. Yeah, they might steal it. Yeah, sure. But if you don't have a collaborative, if this is not part of these days, it's too hard to make something that is truly new, unique, beneficial, efficacious by yourself. There's too many smart people out there. So the only way that it's going to work is if you get together with a bunch of other people or a few other people that you trust and you respect, and you share your idea and you get their input. And then maybe you have a shot at it. So, I agree with you. There is no one person who's smart enough these days to just come up with a finished product on his own.
Dan, how did you start riding bikes? What got you interested in this madness?
Well, I was a runner, and then I had a running injury that caused me to have to move to another sport, and the sport I moved to was cross-country ski racing. And so I just used cycling as a summer activity. But then around 1979 or 80, someone told me about the Hawaiian Ironman. And I thought, it can't be true. It's got to be over 3 days. Can't be all three things in one day. And right about then, I was over my, 50 some odd years of running. I've had these moments in my life where I'd be injured. And usually after 6 months or a year or 2 years or 4 years or something in there, some interval in there, my injury would resolve itself. And my running injury started to resolve itself. And so I was able to run again. And one thing led to another, and I thought, well, once you hear about the first Ironman I did was the first Ironman in Kona in 1981. Once you hear about, like back then, when you heard about that event, it was so outrageous, so ridiculous that you just had to do it. So I was bike racing just as an activity for Nordic skiing, but then that kind of parlayed into triathlons.
So were you a swimmer too, or how? Because you got to swim.
Yeah, I grew up on.
How did you get swimming involved? My
first 15 years, I lived in Huntington Beach, California, and I was they have a program there called Junior Lifeguards, where you spend all summer and you're swimming every day out in the ocean, and ocean swims and buoy swims and pier swims and all that. And so I had that surf swimming background. I was never a swimmer, like a swim team swimmer. I was always a cross-country track team guy. So I had enough swim background to swim, but I didn't really become a schooled swimmer until after I started triathlon. Then I went back and learned. It's kind of like, learning a second language. You can kind of pick it up. You pick up slang and all of that. But then if you want to understand the grammar of a language, you have to go back and study it. So I had to go back and learn the grammar of swimming. I could swim, but I had to learn the grammar of swimming in order to get better. And so I finally, went through that. Yeah, it was kind of like that.
The grammar of swimming, I kind of like that, huh? There's commas and periods and exclamation points and run-on sentences.
Well,
I suppose if I were a swimmer, I'd be a run-on sentence. It's like continually splashing around.
Well, okay, but if you're a bike racer, like cycling's a grunt sport. If you find a guy who's got talent, he'll get from Cat 5 to either he goes from Cat 5 to Cat 2 in 4 months, or it's not going to happen. Like that's how it is in cycling. However, there is still a language to bike racing. There's still a
sure.
Like I mean and it's not like you're this PhD and so you're a smart cyclist. They're completely different. I've known really, really smart people who are dumber than a sack of hammers in a bike race. So you have to be clever and devious to be a cyclist. That's a whole separate kind of intelligence. But that language does still exist, and so I really didn't have that in swimming. So I had to go back and here's what the hand does under the water. Here's what the hand does over the water. Here's your kicking and here's your breathing. And, like you could do it, but then there's doing it right.
Okay.
It really is a great analogy though, because it's so true. It's so technique driven and detail driven. And I'd never swam growing up at all. And I had my eyes opened. We were at Interbike in Vegas doing something and a bunch of triathletes were there. And I was like, oh, let's go to the pool. And I'm like, oh, I'm thinking hang at the pool. And they're thinking swim. And so I show up and, I've never swum. And so all of a sudden I've got like Jordan Rapp and so people who know what they're doing. And Jordan and I, we've been on the same wavelength, I think since the first minute we met each other, both these kind of like engineering trained, people. And it was amazing. In like 5 minutes, he gave me this simple mechanical breakdown. And all of a sudden, I couldn't swim well, but I could actually swim. And you could feel it. And it was just such an eye-opener for me. Like my whole life, I feel like I'm drowning when I try to swim. And for somebody to just explain, it was like somebody giving you the basic, couple of basic words, right?
See, Jordan's
here's your to be verbs, and here's some action verbs.
Jordan's the perfect example of that because, you talk to any pro triathlete. Well, what's your background? Well, I was a swimmer growing up, and then blah blah blah. Jordan was a lacrosse player in high school. His second sport when he got to Princeton was rowing. So when he started doing triathlons, he had lacrosse and rowing to call on. He didn't do any of the other activities, the 3 activities. And so Jordan is a guy to listen to because anybody who can become an ITU long course world champion, multi-time Ironman champion, off of having none of the 3 constituent sports be in your background until you're in your 20s. You have to be special to pick up those activities at that late stage in life.
No, that's a fantastic point. Yeah, it also speaks to my fascination with rowers. Like if you can anybody I've met who can compete in rowing at that level, holy smokes, they've got an engine.
Oh yeah.
And but it is still the technique piece. It's like, okay, I can put you on a bicycle and you can probably smash time trials. Bike racing is a different story. Swimming is a different story.
I don't know if Jordan would ever been a good bike racer because
to have that core engine. Whew.
Yeah, I think Jordan is too nice a guy to be a bike racer. I don't think he ever would have been good at bike racing. He's not nearly devious enough. Me, I have the brain for bike racing. I just don't have the legs for bike racing. I'm a son of a gun.
Are you mean enough?
I'm a nasty guy. Like
you are?
Oh yeah. I'm a perfect.
You're telling me I wouldn't want to get in a sprint with you, right?
Oh yeah, you don't. Well, yeah, but I can't outsprint. I don't have leg power. I know what to do.
Of course, you're the Slowtwitch. You run Slowtwitch. How could you be a sprinter, right? That's just impossible. By the way, we love this name Slowtwitch, and it seems like obvious to us endurance athletes what Slowtwitch is, right? Like Slowtwitch muscle fibers. I'm assuming that's where the name comes from. But tell me about some of the names you kind of tossed around as you were figuring out this brand new site and the brand new internet. What are some of the other names you were considering, or were there other names?
Yeah, actually, Festina Lente was one of them. I think it's an old Roman phrase that's make haste slowly. But I decided on Slowtwitch. Back then you could get domain names. I mean, 1999, there's a lot of available domain names, and they didn't charge any premium or anything. You just got it and registered it, and that was it. But I wanted something that was not. I didn't want try something, or I didn't want anything that hedged you into triathlon, because I didn't know where Slowtwitch would go.
Sure.
I didn't, and I mean today, I would say our readers are almost as likely to be gravel racers or ultra runners or something like that, or just time trialists. So we have a lot of people who read Slowtwitch who don't do triathlons. So, but I don't know how long we're going to keep going. We can go however long you want. But one thing I want to say to Josh, I need to fall on my sword here. A couple of years ago, I did a video, and it was how to clean your bike for the lazy guy. Lazy guy's way to, because what happens with triathletes is they're not lazy, but they just don't clean their bike at all. They're off doing other stuff. They just don't have time. So how to wash your bike. So I did a video, and it's like, here's a pressure washer, and you pressure wash the bike, and if you could spray a little bit of degreaser on the chain and the cassette and stuff like this, pressure wash it, then you get your compressor, and you with compressed air, you take your Presta valve adapter, whatever, blow all that water, and then at the very end, put any old lubricant, put some WD-40, it doesn't matter, just whatever. And I got a toilet flushed on my head by my readers, because it's like, I was with you until that last thing you said. And so it's like, okay, I get it, fine. And so I made a little bit of a study, okay, let's look at squirt, and let's look at different, so bearing in mind it still has to be for the lazy guy, but every time I talk to anybody about lubricants on bikes, like, your name comes up, Josh. It's like, well, what we're doing is pretty similar to what Josh is doing. Josh is doing this other stuff that we're doing. We're not doing that yet. So we're getting there. We're not quite where Josh is. But so I got taken to school by my readers on that. And people need to pay more attention to you on lubrication, me included.
And a round of applause for the Slowtwitch readers out there. We want to applaud all of you for setting Dan straight on proper lubrication of chain.
I will say I love and have loved. I mean, I think I've been in the Slowtwitch community for over 20 years. I mean, I've been there for a long time. And I mean, I love that community because it's such a place to learn. You know, so much of we've talked on this podcast. You know, so much of finding the right solution is figuring out what's the right question. You know, like it seems like so often, especially in this industry, we're finding the right answer about the wrong question. And, you know, having a place where you've got, I mean, athletes of all levels. I mean, you know, there's days I might be at Slowtwitch and, you know, you're interacting with a Jordan Rapp and a Robert Chung and a Gerard from Cervelo/Open/3T. I mean, and yourself, you know, you come in and post and, it's amazing the people who are there, and then the level of some of these technical triathletes is insanely high, right? I mean, a lot of you know, I think a lot of the personality that triathlon attracts, these driven, technically minded people, and so you know, I could name probably 30 of them off the top of my head who are, you know, guys I know, like, oh, he's an age group triathlete, but he's also got a, you know, double PhD in aerospace engineering or whatever. And so just the level of discussion that happens there is amazing, but it also really helps me reading some of those threads to think of, like, you know, if you see a bunch of people complaining about something, I love to scroll through there and just kind of rack my brain with, like, okay, what's the question that's not being answered here? Like, what's the, you know, like it's like refining the question through the details. But it was amazing. I mean, Slowtwitch was the place where when we launched Super Secret, the drip emulsion lube, you know, I spent 2 years trying to figure out how to make the hot wax product into this emulsion because I just didn't think anybody would hot wax. And we launched it and everybody was excited and people were buying it and it really worked. And I think within like a week, there was a thread on Slowtwitch and people were like, well, in the video, he said that the hot melt wax was like 5% better than this. And so why isn't he selling that? You know, and it was like outrage that and I mean, that was really probably the first place that hit me like, oh shit, I've made a huge mistake. I totally underestimated what people would be willing to do. And,
well, you got to,
but it's just an amazing community for that.
You have to remember that there's a lot of people who there's a great silent majority who don't post. And there's the really vocal, sometimes angry, caustic minority who posts. And really, wax that sits in an emulsion is right up our alley because if you go to a race and you look at the state of the bikes, you look at the actual state of the bikes in the transition area. It's not that guy who's, you know, going to spend an extra 2 hours to get the other half a watt. It's the guy who doesn't spend any hours getting any watts because his bike's a mess.
Right.
Back in the 90s, we used to do neutral support. Quintana Roo did neutral support. We'd have 6 tents, 11 workstations, 11 mechanics, and there's 1,400 bikes in the race back then, and we'd work on 600 of them. And so we know what the bikes look like. And and so your ability to find that sweet spot between performance and user friendliness, that's king. As a matter of fact, that sort of in a certain way feeds back into my view that well, okay, I'll give you an example. I've been pretty vocal about this disconnect that we have in the industry between bikes need to fit, and yet I am making you a bike that is impossible to adjust. And ironically, over the past decade, tri-bikes have become really adjustable. Easily adjustable, widely adjustable, finitely adjustable in X and Y coordinates. Road bikes have gone the other way and have become unadjustable And one of the downsides of disc brakes is that if you have to disconnect the hydraulic lines, pull them out from inside the handlebars and the stem, change the stem, probably run new lines, because if the stem that you put on your bike is longer, now the hydraulic lines are too short, or at least the front one is. Plus, you have to cut the last, 10 or 12 millimeters of line off to put a new barb and a new olive in, according to the manufacturer's specs. And so we don't, our problem now in the industry is we have really great product, but we don't have product that we can't make this bike our bike. This bike, we're basically selling motorcycles, because it's like you buy it, you jump on it, you ride it, you better not try to adjust it, because that ain't going to work. And so this user friendliness thing, and how this feeds back into lubricants, is I need to be able to do my lazy man's bike wash, and but find the sweet spot. If I'm going to do a race, great, but how many Ironmans am I going to do a year? Like, how often do I have to do the actual hot wax? So, but there's all those other days that I got to ride my bike. And so lubricants are like everything else, is we need to find that spot where I'm actually going to go through that process. Because otherwise it's like, I'm just not going to lube the bike at all, because it's an act of God to lube this damn bike. And so I'm just going to not lube it at all.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of our people end up.
Yeah, as you said, like a triathlete's generally managing 3 sports and 3 sports worth of equipment that needs to be cleaned and washed and laundered, and it's a lot while training for 3 sports. I get it. The time is the challenge.
Well, one of the reasons why,
especially for these long course.
Yeah, one of the reasons why stationary is such a big deal in triathlon. So it's like, how come so many slow twitchers ride Zwift and Ruvi and RG teens? It's not simply because it's snowing outside. It's because these guys, like when I was making wetsuits, we would poll our folks, find out who they were. And the number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 occupations of people who did triathlons were lawyer was number 1, and businessman number 2. And then the only thing not like, because doctor was way up there. The only outlier was fireman. For some reason, firemen love to do triathlons. But that was the only thing that didn't take a PhD or some sort of advanced schooling. So these are the folks, right? They don't have time to go out and ride their bikes, so they literally have their pain cave like in their business office. And so it's like they get there at 5:30 in the morning. They ride until 6:30 on the trainer, and then they go. And then they're straight in stocks or whatever. And that's one thing I think that it would be better if our industry understood that there needs to be a marriage between high performance and user friendliness.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have an answer to the high performance lube dilemma. We've done like probably 10 shows, right, Josh, on that question in itself.
Oh God,
we'll refer people to that. Dan, I am interested in the one thing you dropped on us there. That is your invention of the triathlete wetsuit. So what specifically what was the problem you saw with the wetsuit, and how did you address it with your engineering and your new look at the wetsuit? What made it stand out?
Don't put my name and engineering together in the same sentence, because that would be you could convict and send me to jail for that conflation. But I was at a race in Bass Lake. Actually, I was at a race very close. I was just there this past week riding my bike. I just put my camper on my truck and took the bike and went up for 4 days and was at this very area that I was when the idea of the wetsuit came along. I was at this race. It's up by Yosemite. And, we're all in our skivvies. We're on these little Speedos, 7 a.m, and we're standing in snow. It's in September. We're standing in snow, getting ready to go. and Scott Tinley and another guy down, pro triathlete at the time, Gary Peterson, they have their surf wetsuits on. And it's like, okay, I'm finally going to beat these guys out of the water. So we do the swim, and I finally don't beat these guys out of the water. And so it's like those guys swam too fast for having to wear a wetsuit. And so I got this idea in my head.
Right.
If a wetsuit wasn't slower, then if a surfing wetsuit isn't slower, then what if you optimized a wetsuit for surface swimming? What would you have? And not very far from me, back then, surf wetsuits, everybody had their factories in the U.S. So I just found these guys who had who had a factory making surfing wetsuits, Victory Wetsuits in Huntington Beach. And I said, I got this idea. I want to go back, work with your guys, work with the patterns and so I was working with and I didn't think of it as a invention. I just thought of it as a intellectual exercise. At that time, Bob Babbitt had a magazine, Running and Triathlon News, which became Competitor Magazine. And I said, Bobby, I want to write this article for you. This was before I wasn't in the industry at all at this point. And he says, yeah, fine, go ahead. So I just was messing around with this idea of coming up with, this intellectual exercise, thought balloon, thought experiment. What would happen? So anyway, I'm working with these guys in the back, these wetsuit makers. They're all third world country people, they're just craftspeople. That's all they are. Pattern makers, gluers, sewers. So we make these wetsuits, and I take it to the pool, and I swim in the wetsuit, and I go, something's wrong with the clock. Clock malfunction. I'm going to swim another 50, swim another 100, swim in a wetsuit. Got the same time. Because I was swimming like 7 seconds faster per 100 yards in the wetsuit than not in the wetsuit.
Wow.
Which is a mountain of time. And that's when
that's a lot.
That's when I realized my life was going to take a big change. This was more than just a magazine article. And that was 1986.
And so was it that moment that you thought, I can make a company out of this? Or were you, what direction was your brain going at that point?
At the time, even back then, 1984, 5, 6, multisport had become, for me, a lifestyle, not just a competition. It became a toolkit. So I would take my bike to Mexico, and I would ride my bike up as high as I could ride it before the paved road gave out. And then I would put my running shoes on. I'd run to the top of a volcano. It's like how I can get from here up to here in one day if I do it using my multi-sport tools. And that's what animated me. I was flying different places around the world doing things like that. And I calculated if I could make and sell 40 wetsuits a month, I wouldn't have to work. I could actually fund going to do these things. But that turned out to be a joke. I went immediately to 800 wetsuits a month. And I didn't even want to have my own factory.
Wow.
I started my own factory because that factory that allowed me to design the wetsuits, they became my contract factory, but they topped out at maybe 200 wetsuits a month. But everybody needed those. I mean, everybody wanted those wetsuits. And I needed 800 wetsuits a month.
Wow.
So I asked the workers that I knew at that factory, has anybody been fired from this company? And, oh yeah, this guy. So I built a factory of people who had been fired from other wetsuit factories. And that became my crew.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So the original business model I love is like, if I could make and sell 40 of these, I don't have to work.
I don't have to work. Yeah, that's it. In fact, if my contract family could factory could make 40 and I sold them, I wouldn't have to work anymore.
Right.
But and I was so dumb. I was so dumb. I didn't know what a payroll tax was. I didn't know what. I mean, I remember when I sold my business because I sold it to Saucony, the running shoe company, and this is in '95, and the guy there who was my contact says, "Okay, I need to have your SG. I need to have your EBITDA and your SG&A and gross margin, gross profit, blah blah blah. It's depreciation schedule, blah, blah, blah. Yes, sir. I'll have it by Tuesday. This is all the due diligence process. I didn't know what any of that stuff. So I had to run to Barnes and Noble, get Business for Dummies. What's EBITDA? So I literally just spent the weekend just like taking myself to 72 hours of business school, so that I could create the what I needed in order to become part of the Saucony family. And fast forward 4 months later, after the sale's completed, I'm sitting in a meeting with the board of directors, investment bankers at Saucony, because we had gone through our first quarter and we'd crushed our first quarter. And it's like, okay, now we're going to hear from the bike division. So I stood up, our EBITDA for the quarter is, 13%, based on, sales, general administrative expenses, blah, 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 blah. And one of the investment bankers stands up and he says, to the footwear people, he says, why can't you guys be more like that guy? And I was such a fraud. I mean, look, you look up imposter syndrome in the dictionary, there's a picture of me. Because I could make the product, but I knew zilch about business. So.
It's okay. Why was that wetsuit faster, by the way? What made it special?
Well, I did some combo of flotation and hydrodynamics. I mean, and also certain features that, allowed a lot more, less restriction when you, because we have at the Church of Slowtwitch, you enter the Church of Slowtwitch and you look on the back of the brochure and there's all the stuff we believe, the Apostles' Creed, right? But not everyone has that same Apostles' Creed. Like some people believe in tubeless and some people believe in tubes, and some people believe in rim and some people believe in disc, right? So we all have our different, and one of the things that never really, 1987 to 35, 36, however long it's been, we still don't agree on this. And it doesn't matter how much data I present. We still don't agree that full suits, long sleeve wetsuits are always faster. They're always faster. They're always faster. Now, I've been saying this since 1987 because we just take the damn thing down to the pool. We test it. We swim. We test. However, full suits are always faster. Now, if you're going to make a full suit, it has to be comfortable. You have to be able to swim without restriction. And so some of the differences in that wetsuit that Scott Tinley swam in at the Bass Lake Triathlon and the one we started selling is it swims much more naturally. So there's just things like that that made the wetsuit a faster wetsuit.
All in the details, as they say, right?
Well, I'm writing an article now about something, and one of the things that I write is it seems to be a rhetorical. You ask yourself what seems a rhetorical question, which is, do people actually use the products they design? In point of fact, in this industry, the sorry answer is that it's not a rhetorical question, and the answer is no, they don't. They don't. People design wetsuits that they don't swim in. They design bikes they don't ride. They design saddles they don't ride. And the reason why the handlebars are uncomfortable and the saddles don't work and the running shoes don't run well and the wetsuits don't swim well and they don't fit and all that is because people don't actually use the products they design for reasons which we can go into. But the reason why our wetsuits did really well is that we all did triathlons. We all swam in the wetsuits. I remember a wetsuit I made that was just going to take us to the next level. And we took it to Interbike. We took everyone loved it. They liked the idea of it. But I had made the mistake of designing the wetsuit, making the samples of it without swimming in it. And I took it to the pool. It's like, you know what? I got to test it. I can't not test it. Sure. So I took it to the pool, put it through its testing, and it was slower than our standard wetsuits. So I called up. We took a mountain of orders for this thing. And I had to call up everybody and say, we're discontinuing this wetsuit. Why? We want as many as you can make. It's slower. We can't sell it. So, yeah. Anyway, but I know you know that, Josh. I know you've been around around enough to know.
I love that. I love that story though, because it's so. I do think one of the challenges for the industry is you do something long enough, you do 2, 3, 4 of them, and you do them really well, and then there's sort of that belief that like, oh, I know what I'm doing. The 5th one's going to be a big step forward, and the 6th one, and I know individuals as well as companies that have let themselves fall into that trap, and it's faster to market, it's easier, it's lower cost to market, but it's not necessarily just because you think you're smart doesn't mean that you're smart. And I know I tell my team here a lot, it's good to be smart and it's equally good to be lucky, and sometimes you get to be lucky and smart, but you can't rely on any of those, right? You can't trust that your luck or your smarts are going to get you. You've got to do the testing, do the due diligence, right? Put it into the world and realize that the customer is not going to use it in the way that you think they're going to use it. Because often, as you know better than anyone, that people can really surprise you. On some of those simple details.
The other thing is,
looked like this. I used it like that.
Yeah. The other thing is that a lot of the stuff that we make and use in our sport, and whether it's wetsuits or whether it's bikes or wheels, the forces, there's when we test it, and this is really getting into your wheelhouse, but when we test things, number one, the forces are so complex that the physics of a bicycle seem to me kind of like the physics of cloud theory, meaning, in climate change, the one big unknown in climate change is we don't know what clouds are going to do. It's the mathematical equations are too complex. We cannot predict clouds, cloud behavior. And the math behind, I remember when Saucony bought us, first thing we did was we turned around and bought Merlin. So I was running both Quintana Roo and Merlin. And we had this bike that Merlin made, and it had what they called a triple clamp, which was it had seat stays that went into a mono stay, and we had this triple clamp. That was this aluminum machine piece that took the seat stays, and then the mono seat stay came out of it, and there was a shock in there. So, and they kept breaking these triple clamps. That's okay. So we bought this really expensive testing machine, had it shipped over. We put the Merlin bikes on the testing machine, and we broke a chain stay. And we put another one on there. We broke a chain stay. we kept breaking the chainstays, but we never broke a triple clamp. In the field, we never broke a chainstay. We only broke the triple clamp. So, and it's because the forces are so complex and so numerous in bikes that it's very hard to. First of all, you have to construct the test correctly, and so you take Zip for example. Zip has that marvelous rolling road. One of the questions though about the rolling road, and I think I would like to have Zip at one point look at this, is the amount of vibration that's in the testing device itself and whether that informs the equation in general. But whether it's the rolling road or whether it's the wind tunnel or whether it's field testing with aero sensors, unless you have the testing correct, then unless you have the protocol correct, the output will suffer from the bad protocol. Plus, the forces are so complex that you have to test, you have to do it, you have to go out and use it. This is why bikes get made, or saddles, whatever, and go through all the testing machines, blah, 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 it's failure. And then you ship it to customers. And the reason why God invented the recall is because all your engineering and all your testing, you did it all right. You did it correctly. But there's noise in between what ought to be and then what is in the field. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's a great example. I know like the ISO in the last few years has changed the crank testing standards. And it was at Cannondale's where I learned this probably 2006, 2007 when we were doing a project at Zip with them. But, the ISO testing for cranks would never break a crank where that crank would break in the real world. I mean, it's to your Merlin problem. Mm-hmm. You could break the crank. It wasn't real. And Cannondale had done all this work and determined an angle and a load at which the cranks that broke in the lab looked exactly like the cranks that broke in the field. And then I think it took 10 years of the industry arguing about it to finally get that updated into the ISO testing. But that's something certainly from the consumer side of things you're not thinking of necessarily, right?
So we don't have, for example, anymore, we don't have speed wobble in bikes. Now pardon me, I might have just spiked the football prematurely on that, but I haven't had a bike speed wobble in 20, 30 years. I don't know. We don't have fork failures anymore like we used to. Remember, we used to have forks that would break inside the head tube right above the fork crown.
Yeah.
And so we went to oversized bottom bearings and this big beefy lower part of the steer column and all that. So the industry's come a long ways, and the bikes that are made nowadays are so much safer. I mean, you still get hit by a car, but at least your own equipment won't kill you the way that we used to have it, back when I was bike racing in the 70s and the early 80s. So all, to your point about standing on the shoulders of others, we're all standing on each other's shoulders, kind of, shoulders of the prior generations, and our math is better, and our protocols are better, and our equations are better, and our CAD systems and our engineering and all that stuff's better. We're still, one of the things I found kind of interesting is in this era after fork failures and everything got so heavily, and the great thing about carbon monocoque bikes and carbon forks is as the bikes get bigger, you can scale the material as well, as opposed to the old days where, you had an inch and an eighth down tube, 1 inch top tube, 1 inch seat tube, like it was the same tube, you just made it longer so you couldn't scale the strength of the material as the bike got bigger. With carbon bikes, now you can scale up the strength of a product as you scale up the size of a product. But one of the things that would happen, and as I was testing bikes, it's like the geometry of this bike tells me this bike should ride like this, but it doesn't. It rides slow. It handles slow. It handles like a dog. And it's because the bike was so stiff that the one thing that I did miss was some degree of sort of, surfing, skiing, the camber of a bike, for lack of a better term, was gone. The dynamic flex in a bike was gone. And so then, Cervelo went through this process of not making stuff stiff enough, making stuff too stiff, and then they kind of came back. And now they make bikes that are sort of appropriately stiff. Now, I just took Cervelo's history between 1995 and 2020. So for the last probably 5, 6, 7 years, the bikes have been appropriately stiff, which is why when I went out to buy a new road bike, I got an R5, because it's like...
That's a great point. I mean, we talk a lot about that. I think the industry and the marketing is so focused sometimes on these maximize, minimize.
Yeah.
Every model has to be lighter and stiffer. The whole laterally stiff, vertically compliant, 5% more than last year. Yeah. And in a lot of these, and stiffness, particularly this frame stiffnesses, they're, I'm not going to call it a right answer, but there's an optimal answer that's somewhere in the middle. There is a too stiff and there is a not stiff enough. But it's so much easier, right, from the communication side of these developments to break that down into stiffer is better, or compliant is better, or whatever the words are that we're using for the thing that we're trying to sell. So, but I agree with you completely. I mean, it's amazing to see where we've come and our ability to tune some of these ride characteristics in these modern bikes back towards the optimal.
Yeah, I think we painted ourselves into a corner in the industry because we've tried to get lighter, and more aero. And pardon to belabor this, but but we've had to sacrifice some things. And one of the things that we've had to sacrifice is user friendliness and ease of adjustability and stuff like that. For example, when I got into gravel, I noticed that there were things in gravel that came back and informed my road riding. For example, I really liked flare in my, 5 degrees or so of flare in my handlebars. And I found that I really missed it when I would go back and ride my road bike after riding my gravel bike. So I want this handlebar in my road bike. And so my road bikes have flare. But this means when I buy a road bike, it's an act of Congress to take the damn thing apart so that I can change the handlebar, and I have to have that handlebar which has a big enough hole in it to put the internal, internally route through the stem, because the stem motif of the bike requires internal routing. And so we've this thing of it's got to, we're 3% more aero. Right. But now I hate the bike. The bike's more aero, but the bike's in the garage.
Right.
I never take, so I've got this aero wonder sitting in the garage that I don't ride because of this thing that you're talking about, which is, trying to beat the, so there's a bike I want to ride. It's like the idea of the bike, and it's specialized. It's a specialized Athos, I think it is. So it's this really light bike, climbing, but the cables are just out there. They're out there for everyone to see. And it's bless your heart, Specialized, that you made a bike that I can actually adjust. And, so I actually want that bike because the cables are visible to me. And I mean, I don't mind if they route sort of right under the, Cervelo has this thing, and some companies have it, where the cables disappear in the top cap of the headset, and then they go inside the frame. Fine, I'm cool with that. Yeah. So there's the stuff around bikes that need to change over the next 5 years are the stuff around bikes, not the bikes. The stuff around, just, how we get them, how we order them, how we pay for them, how they're built for us, where they're built for us, how quickly we can get exactly the bike we want with exactly the handlebar we want. And still, when we get it, the ability to change the stem or change the handlebar. Like, to me, nobody, I say this kind of stuff. Our readers, they don't care about this. I might as well be talking to myself. They'd rather I talk about something else, I think. But anyway.
I was going to ask if you're hearing this on the page. It seems like with bikes these days, it's not so much you're getting a bike where you can do your own changes. You're buying an ecosystem. You're riding this system more than you're riding a bike as we used to know it. And you're either into it or you're not, right? It's almost like an iPhone. Like, you're either in this ecosystem and you're going to use it, or you're not. You're off to somewhere else. So are you hearing this, Dan, from some of the folks who hang out in your forums? Are they equally as frustrated with this lack of adjustability?
I don't think so. I don't know. They're more taken in by this fake paradigm that Josh is talking about, which is, I remember, Josh is old enough to remember back when Tour magazine, just in Germany, just felt that stiffness was everything, and these are the stiffest cranks. Well, okay, but at a certain point, like the crank is the last thing that's going to bend. The pedal spindle's going to bend, the frame's going to bend, all this stuff's going to bend before the crank. So it's like you're testing it at something that's really not a thing, right? And I have a feeling that our readers spend too much time obsessing about, these graphs, these Cartesian graphs. It's like, look at that line, that line's up, that line's down. That means this product's got to be better. But for example, when you bring up ecosystem, I think most people would agree that Garmin has more features for the money most of the time than Wahoo. But Wahoo has this killer ecosystem that I just get. Like, I learned all these modern apps. I learned eTube, Axis, Stages. You go down the list, everyone's got their app, right? I learned the app-based ecosystem from Wahoo because that Element app was so intuitive. It was so easy. And so for me, I'm mostly a Wahoo devotee, not because of product, not because of features, not because of any of that. It's because of ecosystem. So I'm a big ecosystem guy.
Yeah, I think on the hardware side, the bicycle side of the ecosystem, I think we're just too early. I'll say, like, with the 3D printing side of our business, we actually have a customer who I won't name, but we're printing stems for a bike that is currently being sold, and there's only one stem length for this integrated handlebar. And so, as long as if you want this bike, and it's a world tour bike, if you want that bike and you need a length of stem or a handlebar that's not the integrated bar that bike comes with, you're screwed. There's no option for you. And so they've come to us with a quick, help us fill this gap for the next year or two, while we build out the rest of this ecosystem. And coming from the carbon fiber world and the tooling, and as you have, these are complicated, expensive things to build out. But nevertheless, here we are with a bike today that has one stem length and one handlebar width option, or nothing.
Yeah.
And so I'm hopeful that time will treat us better on this, but yeah, it's hard. I know when I talk to people, they're, why is the industry pushing this on us? And I don't want internal. And then you show them two bikes side by side, one with internal, and they're like, oh, that's beautiful. So we're all suckers for that look. And I think at some level that's what we want. It's just, it's back to our, like, is that the right question? You know, is the thing that I want actually what I need and what I want to live with? And at the moment, I think for a lot of people, that answer is probably no.
Yeah.
But gosh, I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we get there.
I feel like there needs to be an intervention. You know, you are an important voice in the industry, and people listen. Really, there's for like whether we deserve it or not, people look at you and me, and they say, well, you know, dirty MFers, but they seem to figure out where the industry is going. They seem to be able to look around the corner better than the average bear. And if there were people like, I don't know, if there were a few people like us who could sort of stage an intervention for the rest of the industry and say, you're all crying because you can't sell bikes. Have you ever asked yourself whether it's something other than we have no Lance Armstrong in our, you know, in America? We have no Greg LeMond. Is that the reason that we're not selling bikes, because of some external thing that you have nothing to do with? Or does it have anything to do with the products that you're making? So my current, like, here's a story. I think I just wrote about this. I was at Cervelo, and Cervelo has an engineer there that I think very highly of, and he rides the heck out of the bike, and he commutes to work every day. So I'm in there, and there's all the bikes hanging up for all the employees, and I said, "That's your bike, isn't it?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "What saddle is that?" "Oh, that's something, you know, that saddle's 10, 12 years old." And it was really worn, but I could tell that was a saddle that I wanted to try on my bike. "Oh, yeah, you can't get that." "No, that saddle's 10 years old." So now the saddle on my road bike's 15 years old. The saddle on my gravel bike's 15 years old, because no saddle today is, you know, am I willing to? I've tried them all. I've tried the 3D printed, all that. I've tried them all. So I'm talking to, and I'm just going to say his name because whatever. I'm talking to Damon Reinhardt at Cannondale, because Damon is the engineer in this industry that I admire the most in terms of a guy who's designing and making bikes. And I tell him this story. And he says, "Yeah," he says, "my saddle's 15 years old. My wife's saddle's 15 years old." Like, everybody I talk to who's been around is saying the same thing. It's like, we can't ride today's saddle. And the shorty saddles, you know, it's 24 centimeters. Forget it, because you can't, like, you know, Phil Liggett, he's riding on the rivet. There's no rivet to ride on a 24 centimeter saddle. You can't move forward, right? So we're sort of chasing something. I don't know what we're chasing, but we're chasing something that's chasing people away from comfort. The saddles don't work. The bikes aren't adjustable. Anyway, pardon my whining, but yeah.
No, I do think that does bring us full circle, though, to, like, so my son's a Boy Scout, and we, of course, do the cycling merit badge for the Boy Scouts. And, you know, I love that you've got all these kids, and some of them don't even have bikes, and some of them you have to teach to ride the bike. And at the end, they've got to do this 50-mile bike ride, and they've got to plan the route and the whole thing. And so, you know, we pull on some local friends and parents, and we pool bikes together. And we're at a spot now where we've got access to, like, a decent little fleet of, like, older, like, kids cyclocross bikes up to, like, small adult gravel bikes for these boys to ride. And now we have girls in Scouts too, so, which is awesome. And it's like, that's always the thing of, like, I love this. This is so much fun, but it hurts so bad. And, you know, we've churned through, you know, you try the bigger ones, the padded ones, the small, but at the same time, I feel like if we could solve that and some of the hand pain and some of the other, that, you know, kids today just aren't as out and active as we were when we were that age, right? But what I do just love is even through the pain, I mean, to see those kids finish their 50-mile ride and, we're a mix of gravel roads and, and they're so thrilled and they're so happy and they've had so much fun. And I just think, wow, if we could take away a couple of those literal pain points, how many more people could we attract in?
So I was riding my...
It really could...
Yeah,
maybe that is the thing. Yeah, I don't know.
I was riding my bike a few days ago, and I'm up there just outside of Yosemite National Park, and I'm on a dirt road, and it's a few miles in to get to this giant sequoia grove that nobody goes to, and I'm on my Cervelo R5 with these Cadex 32 millimeter tires on these Cadex all-road wheels. So I'm on a wheel that's really not supposed to be on that bike. It's supposed to be on a gravel bike. But that wheel is the perfect wheel for that tire, and the tire is the tire I wanted for that use case. So I'm on this dirt road with my road bike, and I just got hit with this memory of the first time I ever rode a bike where I didn't fall down. And I was 6 or 7. And I was at this apartment, and I went outside early, because I've always been an early riser. Go outside at 6 in the morning. And my buddy's bike is leaning up against his front door, a few doors away in this apartment building. And I get on the bike, not knowing I could ride a bike. And I started riding a bike. And it was to this, when people ask me what's the best bike rider, that was the best bike. I've never been happier aboard a bike than that moment. But I was riding this bike maybe 3-4 days ago, this road bike on this dirt forest road, thinking that I shouldn't be able to ride this bike on this road. But it all worked perfectly. And I felt, it seemed like for the first time ever, like I did when I was 7. I mean, that moment of that bike, that exhilarating moment, and I'm 66 now, right? So I'm basically 60 years displaced from that memory, but that memory came back to me. So the equipment, notwithstanding the few gripes I have, saddles and a couple of it, the stuff that we have available to us right now is so marvelous, and it conjures, it elicits these moments of these sublime moments that that this equipment, this tool kit unlocks, and it's just so wonderful, It just, to me, it's never, I just still can't get over the fact that you eat a couple of eggs and you can go out and go 80 miles under human-powered locomotion. And it's the efficiency of that. Like, to me, it's a miracle. So I just, I
agree.
So I bitch and moan and complain and all that, but in general, I'm so thankful that I've gotten to spectate where we are in cycling right now in this industry. I'm just, I guess, thankful for it.
Wow. Well, I cannot think of a better note to go out on than that one. Right there. All of our love and passion for the sport and this tool. Wow. Dan Empfield, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me.
It really has been a pleasure.
It's an honor to have been invited. And anytime I get to spend with you, I treasure that.
You're too kind. Well, thank you again.
All righty.